All right, buckle up for some serious philosophical sparring today.
Ooh, sounds intense.
It is. We're diving into excerpts from Marx versus Nietzsche by Nova Scribe.
Okay, I know those names.
But yeah, this isn't your typical philosophical comparison. This book is more like a cage match. Throws Marx and Nietzsche into the ring
Wow, okay, I'm intrigued.
to debate all sorts of modern topics: religion, truth, freedom, suffering. Even wokeness gets a good thrashing.
So not pulling any punches.
Nope. And to help us make sense of this intellectual brawl, we have our expert guide here.
Ready to break down the jabs and uppercuts.
Exactly. Before we get into the specific arguments, can you just give us a quick rundown of, like, who are these guys? I mean, beyond the names everyone's heard.
Right, so we're not starting totally from scratch.
Yeah, our listeners are smart, but a little reminder never hurts.
Okay, so Marx. Think champion of the working class, railing against the evils of capitalism.
Okay, I can see him at a soapbox, fist in the air.
Exactly. Key idea. It's the material conditions, who owns what, that shape history.
And how we think, right? Like, our ideas are a product of our economic system.
You got it. Now, Nietzsche. Total opposite vibe. The ultimate individualist, scoffing at A and Y limits on personal freedom.
Okay, so picture this. Marx and Nietzsche at a cocktail party.
Oh, the side eye across the canapes would be epic.
Marx is going on about worker solidarity, and Nietzsche's like, over my dead Ubermensch.
And that contrast is what makes this book so fascinating. It throws them into modern debates, forcing us to consider how their ideas, different as they are, might apply to our own world.
Okay, so round one of this philosophical brawl religion, Marx famously called it the opium of the masses.
Right, that idea that religion is like a drug, it dulls the pain of oppression, but doesn't actually solve the problem.
Keeps the working class complacent.
Exactly. Now, Nietzsche, totally different take. He actually thought religion weakens individuals.
Really? But wasn't he all about power? I think he'd be pro anything that gives people, a sense of strength.
True. But for Nietzsche, that strength had to come from within. Religion, to him, makes you subservient, dependent on some external authority.
So you're giving up your individual will.
Exactly. And the book uses this really interesting example to illustrate their points. The execution of Socrates in ancient Greece.
Oh, right. The philosopher who was basically sentenced to death for, asking too many questions.
Exactly. So was it, as Nietzsche might argue, a case of the masses silencing a freethinker who was rocking the boat?
Challenging the status quo.
Right. Or, taking Marx's view, was it more about the elite manipulating the masses to get rid of someone who threatened their power? I mean, Socrates was accused of corrupting the youth, disrespecting the gods.
Sounds awfully familiar, doesn't it? Like how anytime someone challenges those in power, there are always accusations thrown around.
Exactly. And this example highlights a key takeaway. The book pushes us to examine our own assumptions and to see how power dynamics, both material and ideological, might be shaping what we believe to be true.
Which brings us nicely to round two, truth itself.
And this is where things get really juicy.
Right. For Marx, truth was very much tied to those material conditions we talked about earlier. Who controls the resources? Who owns the means of production? Those in power, basically.
And they control the narrative. They get to say what's true, what's real.
So truth becomes a tool of the ruling class.
Exactly. But, as you might guess, Nietzsche flips this on its head.
Let me guess. He'd say truth is whatever the powerful want it to be, to maintain their power.
Bingo. It's all about the will to power. He believed there are no facts, only interpretations.
Okay, I feel like my brain is doing backflips here.
I know, right? And to illustrate this, the book gives some really memorable examples. Remember those ancient Greek historians? We all studied them, but they weren't always super accurate.
Oh, come on. They were embellishing things.
All the time. To make their city-state look good, truth-serving nationalism.
So history's been biased from the start.
Pretty much. Or take the Renaissance. Often hailed as this glorious rebirth of humanism and learning, right?
Yeah, Da Vinci, Michelangelo, the whole gang.
But the book challenges us to look deeper. Was it really all about humanism? Or was it reflecting the rising power of a new class?
You mean the merchant class, the bourgeoisie?
Exactly. Maybe those humanist values were just convenient for them, a way to challenge the old feudal order.
Man, this book really makes you question everything you learned in history class.
It does, and we can see the same dynamic at play even in modern times.
Give me an example. My brain needs a break from ancient Greece.
War propaganda. It's happening right now. How both sides distort the truth, painting themselves as heroes.
And the other side as pure evil.
Right, it's a constant tug of war. with truth getting stretched to fit whoever's agenda is winning at the moment.
Makes you wonder if there's any such thing as objective truth at all.
It's a question that continues to plague philosophers and historians alike. But let's move on to another key battleground in this philosophical showdown: freedom.
Okay, yeah, that's a big one.
Huge. And this is where we really see the core conflict between Marx and Nietzsche laid bare.
Lay it on me.
Okay, so the question is freedom about breaking the chains of societal oppression, as Marx believed? You know, like those systems that keep people down.
Right, like economic inequality, discrimination, all that.
Exactly. Or is it more about transcending those limitations imposed by, like, traditional values, the kind of mental and moral shackles Nietzsche was always railing against?
So is it freedom for the collective or freedom of the individual? Man, this is deep.
It is. And the book digs into how their views on history itself play into this. See, for Marx, history is all about progress.
Even though it's messy with revolutions and all that?
Yeah, he'd say it's messy, but we're ultimately heading towards a more just and equitable future. True freedom, to him, comes when we dismantle those systems that create inequality.
Okay, so history's on our side, even if it takes a while.
Exactly. But Nietzsche had a much more cyclical view of history.
Cyclical, like going in circles.
Yeah, he saw humanity as kind of trapped, repeating the same patterns of rise and fall, constantly making the same mistakes.
That's kind of depressing.
I know, right? Makes you wonder, what's the point of fighting for change if we're just going to end up back where we started?
Right. Like, if history's a broken record, what's the use?
Well, Nietzsche's point wasn't to make us despair. It was more of a wake-up call. Like, hey, recognize the limitations of human nature. Don't get too caught up in grand narratives of progress.
So focus on the individual instead.
Right. Embrace the will to power. Create your own destiny, even if it goes against the grain of what society expects.
It's like he's saying, screw history, I'll make my own future.
Exactly. And the book uses some intriguing examples to illustrate this clash. Take Beethoven, for instance. Was his genius a product of his background, or did he achieve greatness in spite of it?
Yeah, could he have been even more brilliant if he hadn't been constrained by the conventions of his time?
Great question. And then the book looks at Van Gogh. Clearly, his suffering fueled his art.
Yeah, but was that suffering necessary? Or was he just a victim of a system that failed to support him?
See, both Marx and Nietzsche, despite their radically different perspectives, make us question the very nature of freedom.
And its relationship to individual expression, to societal structures, man, it's a lot to unpack.
It is. And that's what makes this book so thought-provoking. It's like they're two sides of the same philosophical coin.
Each illuminating a different facet of the human experience.
Exactly. And speaking of facets, let's move on to a theme that's often hard to discuss: suffering. Now, Nietzsche had a pretty controversial stance on this one.
Oh, I've heard whispers. Lay it on me.
He actually believed that suffering is necessary, makes us stronger, more resilient.
Wait, so he's saying we should, like, seek out pain and hardship. Count me out.
No, it's not quite that simple. It's not about actively seeking pain. It's more about not being crushed by it when it inevitably comes.
Okay, that makes a bit more sense.
Right. For Nietzsche, overcoming suffering is what allows us to grow, to develop that will to power that helps us transcend our limitations.
It's not about avoiding pain. It's about how we respond to it.
Exactly. Now, Marx, of course, had a totally different take. He saw suffering as something imposed on the masses by an unjust system. It's not something to be embraced. It's something to be fought against, eradicated.
So for Marx, suffering is a symptom of a broken system.
Absolutely. And the goal is to create a society where such suffering is no longer necessary, where everyone has a chance to thrive.
Okay, so we've got these two opposing views. Suffering as a crucible for growth versus suffering as an injustice to be overcome.
And that's the question the book poses to us. Where do we fall on this spectrum? Can we ever truly escape suffering?
Or is it all about how we respond to it? Do we let it break us or use it to become stronger?
Big questions, no easy answers. But I think both Marx and Nietzsche, in their own ways, offer valuable perspectives on this age-old dilemma.
Okay, before my brain melts from all this deep thinking, let's shift gears a bit. The book takes a really interesting turn. It throws these 19th century thinkers headfirst into modern dilemmas.
I love that. Like, what would Marx and Nietzsche think about, I don't know, Twitter, cancel culture?
Exactly. And one of the most fascinating battles they wage is over the concept of wokeness.
Oh, yeah, that's sure to get people talking.
It does. Now, Nietzsche, with his whole emphasis on individuality and self-reliance, would probably see wokeness as a form of, like, self-destruction.
Right. He'd probably argue it stifles individual expression, critical thinking.
Leading to a kind of intellectual stagnation.
Exactly. He might even see it as a new form of slave morality.
Okay, for those of us who haven't brushed up on our Nietzsche lately, remind us what that is.
Basically, it's his term for a system of values based on resentment and weakness. One that values, like, humility and obedience over strength and self-assertion.
So the opposite of what Nietzsche's all about.
Exactly. He'd argue that true strength lies in embracing your individuality and forging your own path, not conforming to some prescribed set of beliefs, no matter how well-intentioned.
Okay, makes sense. So how about Marx? How would he interpret the whole wokeness phenomenon?
That's where it gets tricky. Remember, Marx was all about analyzing power structures, economic systems. So he might see wokeness as, like, capitalism's latest trick.
Capitalism's trick. Explain.
Okay, so think about it. Capitalism thrives on dividing people, creating new markets. Maybe wokeness, as it manifests in consumer culture, is just another way to do that.
You mean like how companies now try to appeal to every niche identity group to sell more products?
Bingo. It's like, hey, buy our rainbow-branded product and you're supporting social justice. But are they really?
So Marx would be skeptical, to say the least.
Oh, absolutely. He'd say it's just commodifying identity, turning social justice into a profit-making scheme.
Wow, that's a really insightful take.
It makes you wonder if wokeness, as we see it today, is actually helping to dismantle systems of oppression or just reinforcing them in new, sneaky ways.
Mind blown. So we've got Nietzsche seeing wokeness as a form of self-destruction, and Marx seeing it as a tool of capitalism.
Two very different perspectives, but both thought-provoking, right?
Absolutely. This book really forces you to think outside the box.
And that's the beauty of it. It forces us to consider multiple viewpoints, to challenge our own assumptions.
All right, deep divers, we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our dive into Marx versus Nietzsche. Religion, truth, freedom, suffering, even wokeness. And this is just the beginning. We'll pick up the fight next time.
Get ready for more intellectual fireworks.
See you then.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Marx versus Nietzsche.
You've already heard their clashing takes on religion, truth, freedom, and even suffering.
And we left you wrestling with that question. Is suffering something to overcome, or is it actually the key to growth?
Heavy stuff. But before we spiral into an existential crisis...
Right, let's not get too gloomy.
Let's shift gears and tackle another massive theme the book explores. The individual versus the collective. This is where Marx and Nietzsche really throw down.
Oh yeah, this is their bread and butter.
Right. So for Marx, it's always about the collective, about the power of the working class to, like, band together and overthrow those oppressive systems.
Exactly. Like that whole workers of the world unite vibe.
Right. He believed that our individual struggles are all connected, so true liberation can only come from collective action.
Makes sense. Power in numbers and all that.
But then you have Nietzsche, on the flip side, all about the individual.
Will to power. Breaking free from the herd mentality. Very different approach.
So to put it simply, teamwork makes the dream work for Marx, while Nietzsche's all about pulling yourself up by your bootstraps.
Love that analogy. And the book uses some interesting examples to illustrate this tension.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Well, it talks about the ancient Greek hero Achilles.
Oh, right. The guy from the Iliad. What's he got to do with all this?
Well, he's often seen as, like, the ultimate individualist hero.
Yeah, fiercely independent, driven by personal honor and glory.
Exactly. But what the book points out is that even Achilles, this seemingly lone wolf, is still bound by his social context.
So you're saying even the most hardcore individualist can't escape the fact that we're all connected in some way?
Exactly. It's this complex dance between individual agency and social structures. Are we really calling the shots in our lives? Or are we shaped by forces beyond our control?
Man, that question has been bugging philosophers for centuries, hasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And it's one that the book really digs into.
So how do they, like, apply this to the real world, not just ancient Greece?
Well, to bring this debate to life, let's jump into another historical example. The French Revolution.
Yes. Talk about a turning point in history.
So much individual heroism, but also so much collective action.
I bet Marx and Nietzsche would have some strong opinions on this one.
You bet they would. Marx would probably be laser-focused on the economic and social conditions that led to the revolution.
Right, the gap between the rich and the poor, the rise of the middle class, all that stuff.
Exactly. He'd see it as a classic example of class struggle, of the oppressed masses finally saying, enough.
And rising up to demand a more just society.
You got it. And even the Reign of Terror, brutal as it was, Marx might argue it was a necessary part of the process. Got to break a few eggs to make an omelet.
So while Marx is cheering on the collective spirit of the revolution, where's Nietzsche in all this?
Well, I think he'd be more interested in those individual figures who, like, rose to prominence during that chaotic time. Think Robespierre, Napoleon.
Right, the guys who seize the moment.
Exactly. Nietzsche might admire their ambition, their boldness in shaping the course of history.
But I'm guessing he wouldn't be a fan of that whole liberty, equality, fraternity slogan.
You're reading his mind. He was very critical of any ideology that tried to, like, level everyone down.
He believed in that natural hierarchy, with exceptional individuals rising above the masses.
Exactly. So it's like Marx is looking at the big picture, the collective struggle for a better future, while Nietzsche's zooming in on those individuals who make their mark on history.
Two totally different lenses, but both revealing in their own way.
It's like they're each holding up a different mirror to history, showing us aspects we might otherwise miss.
Now, I know the book doesn't just focus on this individual versus collective thing, right?
Oh, there's so much more. For instance, it also dives into the impact of technology on society.
And that's got to be where Marx's ideas really come alive.
Absolutely. He was way ahead of his time in recognizing the power of technology to transform society, for good or for bad.
It's like he predicted the whole automation debate we're having today, with robots replacing jobs and all that.
Exactly. He saw technology's potential for progress, but also its potential to alienate us from our work.
And from each other, right?
Exactly. Now, Nietzsche didn't write a ton about technology specifically.
But if we apply his ideas about, individual will and creativity.
You'd probably see technology as a tool, right? It can empower us or enslave us.
Depending on how we use it.
Exactly. So it's not about rejecting technology altogether, but about using it in a way that enhances our individuality.
And creative potential.
Right. Not something that limits or controls us.
Man, that's a tough balance to strike.
It is. And it gets to the heart of the challenge we face today.
Yeah.
How do we harness the power of technology without becoming slaves to it?
It's like we're wrestling with this constantly.
We are. But I think both Marx and Nietzsche, despite their differences, can help us think through these dilemmas. Marx reminds us to be wary of exploitation.
Right. Don't let the machines take over.
Exactly. While Nietzsche encourages us to use technology as a tool for self-expression, for empowerment.
Okay, so we've explored individual versus collective, the role of technology in shaping society.
We even delved into some juicy historical examples to see how these philosophical frameworks help us understand the past.
And it's all connected, right?
It is. And I think one of the key takeaways is that both Marx and Nietzsche, despite their differences, offer valuable insights into being human.
They make us confront those big questions, think critically, challenge the status quo.
Exactly. And in the next part, we're going to wrap up this philosophical showdown by diving into the nature of history itself. Get ready for a final round of intellectual fireworks.
All right, deep divers, welcome back for the final round of our epic Marx versus Nietzsche showdown. We've covered a lot of ground.
From religion and truth to freedom, suffering, even wokeness.
We've seen how their ideas might play out in historical events like the French Revolution.
And how they might approach modern dilemmas like the whole technology thing.
But now, in this final round, we're tackling a question that's been bugging philosophers forever.
The big one.
The nature of history itself.
Yeah.
What is it? Where are we going? All that jazz.
And this is where the book we're looking at really shines, because it doesn't just, present their ideas side by side.
It's not just a comparison chart, right?
Right. It puts them into direct dialogue, like they're having this heated debate across time and space.
I love that. So on this question of history, Marx, with his focus on material conditions, class struggle, he saw it as a linear progression.
Right, like we're on this upward trajectory, even if it's bumpy, towards a communist utopia.
Okay, so history's a ladder. We're climbing towards a better future.
Exactly. He believed each historical era is defined by the conflicts that come from, like the contradictions within its economic system.
So who has the stuff, who does the work, that kind of thing.
You got it. But Nietzsche,
Yeah.
always the contrarian.
Yeah, he wouldn't just hop on the progress train, would he?
Nope. Deeply skeptical of any grand narrative of progress. He saw history as cyclical.
Cyclical, like going in circles.
Exactly. Humanity's doomed to repeat the same mistakes over and over. No matter how hard we try for something better, we end up back where we started.
That's a pretty bleak outlook. What's the point of fighting for change if we're just going to backslide?
It can feel that way, for sure.
Yeah.
But Nietzsche's point wasn't to make us despair. More of a wake-up call.
Reality check, maybe.
Right. He's like, hey, recognize the limitations of human nature. And instead of focusing on changing the world, he's saying focus on changing yourself.
So become the best, most powerful version of yourself, even if the world's a mess.
Exactly. For Nietzsche, true freedom is in recognizing the absurdity of it all, and embracing the will to power, not enforcing some utopian vision that might not even be possible.
Okay, so individually, we can rise above the cycle.
That's the idea. But here's what's cool about this book. It doesn't just, like, pit these thinkers against each other.
It doesn't take sides, right?
Right. It finds those surprising areas where their ideas actually complement each other.
Makes you think, maybe they're not so different after all.
Exactly. And one area where they might find some common ground, surprisingly, is in their critique of modern society.
Both grumpy old men, in a way.
Maybe. But they were both deeply critical of the alienation they saw all around them.
Alienation meaning.
That feeling of being disconnected, like a cog in the machine.
Yeah.
Marx, of course, focused on the worker under capitalism.
Working your butt off, but not feeling connected to what you're producing.
Or the people you're working with, even.
Right. It's all about profit, not people.
Exactly. Now, Nietzsche's critique was broader. He worried about the leveling down of culture, the loss of meaning, in a world obsessed with science and tech.
Like we've lost touch with what makes us human.
Right. So, different approaches, but they're both concerned about the same underlying problem. How modern life can make us feel fragmented, lost.
I think we all feel that sometimes, right? Especially now.
Oh, absolutely. In our world of, like, constant information overload, hyper-individualism, it's easy to feel overwhelmed.
Like we're adrift, searching for something to hold on to.
And both Marx and Nietzsche offer us ways to resist that. Marx calls for collective action, solidarity,
People power.
Exactly. He believed in coming together to fight for a more just world. Nietzsche, on the other hand.
He'd probably say, screw the system, focus on yourself.
Yeah, but not in a selfish way. It's more about cultivating that inner strength, resilience, so you can navigate the world without losing yourself.
So it's like two paths to reclaiming our humanity, in a way.
I think that's a beautiful way to put it. Whether we fight for systemic change or cultivate individual strength, their ideas give us tools for navigating life's challenges.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, I think that's the most important thing to remember. Marx and Nietzsche, despite their differences, they give us these powerful lenses to view the world.
To understand ourselves, imagine new possibilities.
They challenge us to think critically, to never stop asking those big questions.
And that's what we hope we've done in this deep dive, whether you're Team Marx or Team Nietzsche or somewhere in between.
We hope you'll keep exploring, keep questioning, keep striving for a better future.
And don't forget to check out the show notes for more resources to keep the conversation going. Until next time, happy deep diving.